All right, guys, so we're picking back up in our work on this exercise of creating our storefront here. And yesterday we had worked on making the create function for things kind of work for all sorts of data types that we have here. And so we'd first broken out this function here to increment the max ID of a specific table. And then we had rewritten this function to use this sort of format where we're passing the table name and the fields to insert without actually hard coding anything, so that this same function can be used for store owners and customers and even products and stores as well, even though we haven't really worked with those other data types too much. So where we kind of left things yesterday was, okay, well, we want to go do the same sort of thing for all of our other things like read and update and delete as well. So Audie, you said that you had a question that you wanted to ask about running something by me here.
Yeah. So can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So what I wanted to ask was, or rather, this is what I wanted to run by you. I thought I could make a function that I would call at the line field names equals, basically I could set that function equal to field names. Then for row in CSV Reader is where I wondered what I could do, because what I wanted to do was to be able to determine through that function which table name or which record is being read. Mm-hmm. So if it's the customer's record, then we would have a different list for field names. If it's the store owner's records, it would be a different list, and so on and so forth. So, but where I had a problem was, even if I did that, I still needed to figure out a way to work for row, the for loop in the CSV Reader part. So I wasn't entirely sure how to make that work. So even if I did it, I'd still be stumped.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's tackle things one step at a time. So we know that field names, when we're writing a read record here, so you have read store owner. Let's go grab the read customer too. Remember how we said that we want to, at least for the first little bit, we want to try comparing two functions that we've written side by side to see what's different, right?
Yeah.
So, like I said, once you get more experience, you can just look at one function and figure out how to do this. But for the first little bit, it kind of helps to have two for direct comparisons. So this is different here. Field names is different, right? The name of the CSV file is different. The things that we're grabbing here are different. And then the things that we're printing are different based on what we grabbed here, right? So actually quite a bit is different in these functions. But let's tackle one thing at a time. So first one, field names, right? Now, somewhere we're going to have to kind of hard code the field names for each kind of table, right? Like we can't get around needing that information specified somewhere. The question is, do we want to? So one option would be for us to pass it in every single time. So for example, if we are going to be calling our read record file like this, first input might be table name, like you've started trying. And then the second input, we could have the field names, right? This would work. There's no reason why this wouldn't work. However, then we have to pass it every single time we call the function, right? And that's going to get pretty old pretty fast, because you're going to have to remember the order and all of the fields for each one of the tables that we're using off the top of your head every time you want to call the function, right? So you see why that's probably not so great either. So what I would think, so we need to get different sets of fields for different tables, right?
Okay.
So can you think of a way in which, if we have a table name, based on what the table name is, we return different things. Think in terms of like code execution flow, things we've learned.
We could use a conditional.
Okay, so you have a function here called get field names. What happens if we make this take in a table name and you say conditional? So for now, we will say if table name, and what should happen after that?
If table name, okay. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If table name equals customers or something else.
Okay, if table name equals customers. What do we want field names to be?
Field names would be a list of ID, name, username.
It'd be this one, right?
Password and cache. Yeah.
Fact. Let's do that, right? And then this becomes, oh, you know what? We could just leave those functions written as is, that's fine. And we'll do this down here. So you've started your generic function here. So field names, we can get the field names by calling a function called get field names where we pass the table name. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we need to handle, let's do the store owner case next. How about now?
Yeah.
It's gonna be this one, right?
Return, yes.
With what we're doing makes sense?
Yeah, that's
So
what I was thinking.
Where this will be used is when we are, anytime we want to get the field names for one of the things we're doing, all we have to remember is what the names of the tables are called. We don't actually have to ourselves memorize the list of fields and what order they're in, because that would be kind of too much. So this is the place where we specify that, and that where eventually we could also change this, right? But
yeah. And we could add the table names too. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're getting the field names generically, right? And you've got the CSV file, right? That's how we do this, right? We already did that the other place. So we're opening the CSV file generically for a row in the CSV file. So this is going to be hard because right now we're grabbing all of these things, right? But this is being built by being hard coded. So let me phrase things a certain way and see if something jumps out at you. So if we have a string that we're building here and it has multiple things in it, and right now we're hard coding the things, and we have this thing up here that has multiple things in it, how would we go through to do something based on every one of these things to build a string?
I'm not sure. I'm drawing a blank on that.
Okay, so let me see if I can phrase it a bit differently, right? So, well, I mean, generally, anytime you're working with multiple things, right? What kind of control are you going to be using in your code?
For loop.
Okay, so we have an outer for loop where we're going through each one of the rows. But what we really care about here is all of the field names, right? And if you look, so this was starting with the kind of get fields, right? Are there going to be some things that we care about and some things that we don't care about, right? So if we have a customer and we have ID, name, username, password, and cache, right? Well, we know that we don't really want to print the ID. right? And
Yeah.
we don't really need the username if we have the customer name, right? Because it's not going to be different information here, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We'll print just the name and the cache, not even the password, right?
Okay.
Okay.
So how about, you see, in this function, are we ever using all of the table names in any way?
All of the table names, no.
Mhm.
It's one at a time.
So, well, I mean, what I
Okay.
meant by that was like, we're only going to be using a subset of them, right? In fact, we only
Yes.
want to print a subset of them. So this one,
Yes.
what I would have us do actually, I would have us actually make a separate get field names. I'd have us make a separate function for this. So right there, these are all of the fields for the things. Now that will be necessary, as we'll get to eventually when we do like update and delete. Like we will need this function. We just don't need this function for read. So what we're going to do instead is have the same sort of structure here, except we're only going to grab the fields that we want to print for reading. So we don't want ID, right, for customers. We don't want username or password. So we just want name and cache, right? How about for store owners?
Just name, assets, and liabilities.
Okay, right? Okay.
Yes.
So now we're going to call this function instead, get field names for read. Okay. So let me, rather than doing this, I will write some stuff to frame this. And so we know that this is a list of strings, right? Field names is a list of strings, right? And you see how we're indexing into row with strings here?
Yeah.
So start out making an record empty, right? And then for, actually, we should wrap this whole thing in. Well, it looks like we're going to need ID too, aren't we?
Okay.
So
Yeah, we will.
I lied. We will need ID here. But if we always have ID in the first position in the list, you'll see why that's important in a second. Okay, so what did I delete up there? Where's this ID even coming from?
Oh, the ID, I think there's an example call for the function we were supposed to use like for customers.
Well, no, I mean, I know what it is, but like that variable is never being defined. Like, I wonder if something got deleted somewhere along the line here. Because what it seems to me like we need a line that says something like this. It's
Okay.
not true. Right? Like otherwise, what's this?
Okay.
I wonder if that got deleted sometime along the line, because this did work at one point, right?
Yeah, it did. We actually ran the code. We had something in it.
Interesting. Well, I can't speak to what it was doing, but I think we need that. So, okay. So, well, at any rate, in the one that we're writing here, so that was customer and store owners. Well, we're trying to write our own read here. Order-wise, kind of makes sense for us to check this conditional, right? So we can say I'm gonna make that not just for users, right? Because we want to be able to print records of any type.
Yeah.
Okay. So if the ID that we're interested in is the ID of the one that we're going through here, then we're going to make a variable Okay, so you remember this function here?
Yeah.
Range has a start, a stop, and an int. So if you just give it a stop, it will go up to the it'll go up to the last thing in a list, right? But we know that we want to skip the first thing. Why do we want to skip the first thing? Because we were going to put ID in these places, and we don't really want to show the IDs because the user doesn't care. It's a security risk if we do. So we want the range here to not start from 0, but where should it start from?
It should start from 1.
Okay, 1, and then we do the length field names, right?
Okay.
We do need 3 parentheses there. Is it not like, I don't think Python likes that. Yeah, there we go. Whatever. Following so far?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So if we want to be building out our record, what should go inside this loop? What should be the call inside this loop? And look at this for an example here. So think in your head, trace through the code in your head. What's going to happen once we've returned this list from this function call up here? Get field names for read is going to get this list of stuff. And then we're going to go through for the indices in this. So this is index 0, 1, 2, 3, right? And this call here is going to go through indices 1, 2, and 3. How do we make this code, which is going through that in a loop, how do we make it look like this? Remember that this is a string.
I was just going to say print I, but if we want to have it printed out like a string rather than, I don't know, a paragraph list or something like that. I don't know how to explain it, but print I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
So
I'm thinking to use the same printf statement, but in the.
So how are we going to grab these things dynamically though? Because we don't necessarily know how long the list of field names is going to be. And we can't do this because we're not going to always know if it's going to have assets and liabilities, right? Not in this case where we're trying to make it work for anything, any field that we're using.
Yeah.
So if I tell you the 2 words building strings, something should immediately pop in your head. Anytime we build strings, we're adding things to strings. What do you use?
We use plus
concatenation, right? Okay. Yeah. So what are we concatenating with what?
We're concatenating the elements in the range. I'm not really sure how we're going to do that.
So we want to build the record, right? We want to build something that looks like this.
Yeah.
Okay. So
right.
we go in order. to add a pipe in the middle there. And then we want to grab one of the field names. What goes there?
Okay. Okay. I would have said an index, but do we, okay, an index 1.
So we want this to work for all indices in the loop, right? And
So
I will go there. And so when this runs, this first iteration is going to be name, second iteration is going to be assets, third iteration is going to be liabilities.
Okay. Okay.
But do we want, look at the code down here and tell me what's wrong with what I just did.
With what you just did and what you've written here.
Like, what's wrong with this? Is this going to grab the value of name, the value of assets, and the value of liabilities? So not the string name, assets, and liabilities, but is it going to grab the values? So look at this code down here for just a second.
Oh, right.
So when we index into field names here with this, we're going to be getting back the string name and the string assets and the string liabilities. So if we were to have the record equal this, we would have literally the strings name, assets, and liabilities, right? Yeah,
I get that now. So, but how can we make that clear here? Wouldn't we have to use the whole field names equals field names thing? Or I don't know. We already
so
have that.
How are we grabbing the values here? You see how we're indexing with these? Because this is a dictionary and the keys to dictionaries are strings. So it's really not a trick question. If we index the row with the field names, so a lot goes on here. So you come to the outer structure and you say, okay, I want to get the thing in row corresponding to the key represented by field names at index I. So now we need to go and do this one. What's field names at index I? Well, we're getting I from our loop, right? And then having gotten the index, we're going to go grab the thing in the list corresponding to that index, right? So the first iteration through this loop, how this will work is we'll have record is equal to an empty string. So this will be an empty string, and we're going to concatenate it with a pipe. We'll get to the fact that this isn't quite right in just a second here. And then after that, we're going to add, whatever the value for name is, because we're grabbing field names at index I, and I is 1, and field names of 1 is name, right? So you should have just seen the problem here is that the very first iteration, this is nothing. And then we're still going to print a bar, right? And if you look at our output format, that's not quite what we want.
No bar before name. Is that a problem?
We could either have a conditional on everyone, or we could just come back after we've done the loop and remove the first 3 characters. You see that?
Okay. Yes.
So we're going to say string here, or we're going to say record is equal to. Now we have to be careful. We're going to make the assumption here that there is actually a record with this ID and stuff. We'll come back and we'll do validation later, because the line that I'm about to do here, where we're going to say that record is record, but it's going to be everything but the first 3 characters, right? This won't work if you have like an empty string, right? You'll get an index out of bounds error. So we're going to assume that the string's not empty here.
Okay.
What we've done makes sense? I mean,
yes. This last bit is to make sure that there is no bar at the beginning.
Because the very first iteration where this is empty, this will get stuck on the beginning, and then we'll add this. And then for the subsequent ones, it'll work properly, but then we'll have this hanging out at the beginning first time. Now, this right here is the way that most people would approach this problem. Like, you've learned programming, you know how loops work, you know how indexing works. This will work fine. However, there is something called joining strings. So there's a join method for strings where it takes in a list like this, and then it lets you join them based on whatever string you want. And so you see how this is not going to be like sticking stuff in between, or like it's not going to have the problem of the first thing having the delimiter at the beginning and then having to manually remove the delimiter. That's like what we were doing when we were using the loop here. So this is basically what we want, right? Now the trick is, so let's use the cleaner version. I wanted us to do it the first time because I wanted you to understand what we were doing, right? Otherwise, it gets kind of tricky, right? So let me think about this for a second. We want to be joining not the field names, but what we want to be joining the everything in the row, right? You know, I'm actually thinking about, this is really easy if you use a lambda function, but we haven't done those yet. So, forget I said that. Just keep that in the back of your head, that eventually we might want to do things by joining a string rather than doing it manually ourselves like this. So the reason why I'm not having us do that is because we would have to write something to get a list here of the return values of row, like indexing into row like this, right? And like pseudocode-ish, that looks something like row values equals, we would do like build some list dynamically of like row of field names, right? Like we would have to like go through and build row values, which we could do. Forget it. You know what? You don't have to use a lambda function. It just looks easier if you do it. Let's actually do it just so that you have a point of comparison. Okay, so we decided this is one way to build a record, right? Now we're going to look at a way using the join function. Okay, so one other thing that I realized here, you see how we're using format here? Let's handle one thing at a time. I'm sorry to keep jumping around, but you see how we're using format here? And assets and liabilities here are not strings, right? They're like floating point data types, right? But you see how we're treating them as if they are strings here? So we actually need to put one more call around all this. Does it make sense why I just did that?
Yeah.
So if you try to turn a string into a string, it's gonna be like, okay, cool, I don't need to do anything. But if you have something else that you're trying to turn into a string, it'll do the conversion and then it'll let us concatenate it, right? So this is now getting really complicated. The outer thing is the toString function. Then we're indexing into row. Then we're indexing into field names, right? So there's like 4 things happening here using the value of I that we're getting from the for loop.
Okay.
It's a lot packed into that statement. Okay, so we said this was one way of doing it, right? I always forget whether when you index in Python, I don't know if it's this. I'm pretty sure it's actually this. Yeah, I think I was off by one of my indexing, right? Because we want to get from everything, or do we want to get, we want to ignore indices 0, 1, and 2. So is it 3 from the end or 2 from the, I'm not sure. I think it's 3 from the end. So that's the way of doing it. that way. So let's instead try to use join. And so if we instead do this, and then, so we'll have our same loop here where we're going through the range, but let's make stick that down here. We're going to start out with row values being an empty list. So this should look real familiar to us, right? Because that's exactly the same thing as this thing right here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to make row values a list of strings. And then at the end of this, how do you call this? Oh, so you put the delimiter dot join, not that. So we want our delimiter to be space bar space. I know I wrote that pretty fast, but does it make sense what we're doing?
I think so. With row values dot add, where okay. With row values dot add, we are creating a list. We are adding things to the list row values. I'm not really sure where record comes from now. Okay, so you create a new what's it called? Variable and set the list row values to it, and then you add this character, the bar character, to it. But wouldn't this put it in front?
So the join function here, let me see if I can get another example.
Okay, it works as a delimiter. So yeah, it will go between the characters. Okay.
Yeah,
between the elements.
This function takes in the delimiter, which is the thing that you pass up front, and it sticks it between all of the things in the list.
Yeah, I get that.
So this is probably the cleaner way to do it, right? Because you never have any weird thing that you have to like come back and remove. But either way of these would work.
So I was heading in the right direction in the beginning, trying to make a function for field names.
Yep.
Okay.
And remember that the field names that we're getting for read, smaller subset than all the field names, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to try to make you do a little bit more on the next one. So now we have a generic read, and we also have a generic create, right? So now we want to do generic update and generic delete as well. These are delete and update are rather similar, right? Okay, so you know what? Let's see if we can pressure ourselves without having the other update right next to us. Let's see if we can figure out what will change. Would this change in the other update method, the field names?
No, nothing changes. The field names is the same.
No, I'm talking about like, so this is the update store owner one, right?
Okay.
Would the field names change if we were updating a customer instead of a store owner?
Yes, it would. Yes, it would.
So up here, we said field names equals get field names for read, right?
Yes.
So rather than get field names for read, we want to just be calling normal get field names, right? Because this has all of them here.
Yeah.
Okay. Why doesn't it like this? Okay, signed but never used. That's fine. How about this one? With open blah.csv, an output file is CSV, right? Do all this stuff. So let's get up to here.
Yes, but we'll change store owners to table name.
Plus CSV. Okay.
Yeah. So.
And so here we need to pass in an ID, right? Previously, we were calling that store owner ID. Now we're going to call it ID. We still need these parameters too for field and new value because we still need to know exactly what we're updating.
Yeah.
Table name, field. Oops. Where did I change it? I put it on the wrong one. It's like, no, I added it somewhere. Table name, ID, field, new value. Okay. So let's do this one next. Here's our conditional. That store owner ID, it's what we called it down there, just becomes ID, right?
ID, yeah. Okay.
Okay. So we're not going to let them change their ID, right?
Yeah.
What we're saying here, but we're going to let them change other things. So if you're a customer, you can change name, username, password, or cache. If you're a store owner, you can change name, username, password, assets, liabilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this one still okay, right? How about this?
Yes.
Is this still okay?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And now we get to this one right here, right?
Yeah. So here we would have to make everything generic like before.
Mm-hmm. So let's go look at the CSV package writer, CSV writer, and specifically we're using a dict writer, right?
Yes.
CSV dict writer. So I think the way we were doing it.
Why are we looking it up though?
Because right now, right now we're kind of doing it all, being very specific about it. Like I think we can just pass in the variable row is what I'm trying to get us to see here. Yeah. So this looks like what we were doing here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you know, let's try it. So we're actually changing something here, right?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that, okay, this is store owner. Let's go ahead and finish off the function here. What data type is row?
A dictionary.
Mm-hmm. Don't you think that'll work?
Okay.
Yeah, and this is, I don't particularly know why. We were doing it before to be very precise, right?
Yeah.
But I don't really think we actually need to do that. I think this will work fine. All right. Delete should be quite simple because it's very similar to this, right?
Yeah.
So if you remember, the only thing that we did on delete was rather than checking, we just continued here, right? We only had like one thing different, right? So we're just gonna go ahead and copy this function. shocked at how fast we do this one. Delete, everything's the same, except if row ID equals ID, you see this one right here. If
Instead of
ID
changing
is
anything,
equal to
we
row
can just-
ID, we don't have the and there, rather than doing anything else. Continue. Yeah.
Hmm. It
Except
hurts that
I
can
did
do all of-
it Whoops. All right, so let's move some things around and then let's try using some of the functions that we've made here, right? So yeah, we have helper functions in all of these things as well, right?
Yeah.
So let's come up to the top of our file and we're gonna say, okay, there's our comment explaining some of this stuff, but these are going to be our more final functions here for a while. So maybe we go in order. So create, read, update, delete. Okay, so let's find our create. Here's our create. Our create uses something called increment max ID. Now, if you remember, when we delete something that has an ID that has been used, we're not actually going to decrement the max ID. The max ID is just going to keep growing. Technically, we might want to recover it. What happens if our database has millions or even billions of records, right? Well, then, we might want to actually reuse IDs eventually. We're just not going to worry about it though, because it adds a lot of complexity. So here's create, right? And after that, we have read. Where's our read function? Here's our read function. Create, read. Those are the methods for read, and then update and delete. Okay, so let's come to our list here, and we see in customers right now we have, let's just start with those three, right? And in store owners. Now, let me keep this. So so these are the lines we want to do. So we're going to call create up here. So create, you know what, we should probably call this read record, update record, delete record. Okay, so we're going to call this create record, and then our autocomplete is going to tell us that we need a table name. We want customers, right? And then we're also going to need fields, which is going to be an array, right? Or not an array, a list.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't pass ID, right? But we will pass name here. Password is going to be this. And you remember that we said we were just going to make these strings when we did it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see if it works. So right now, customers does not contain Ariel Manson. So do we have any other calls anywhere? Trying to see, because we don't really want to. We just want that to be the only thing that we're going to execute here. Are we calling main somewhere? This, I'll let that out. Okay, I don't think we have any other calls anywhere. So this should be the only line that actually executes here is our call call to create record right here on line 95. Okay, so if we run this, well, we get an error. Name CSV. Oh, it's because these things need to go to the top of the file. So we get errors, right? Road data. Huh. So I don't think, have we tested any of our generic functions before this? I don't know if we actually had.
We tested create record with Alice Carter and it worked.
So did I set up the call wrong somewhere? No, it's because we have too much information, right? I must have copied from the wrong place, right? I had passed in two parameters.
Oh, okay, for customers, yeah.
Right.
Customers is supposed to have just cash, not assets and liabilities.
But still didn't like that. Iterable expected. Not.
What did it say? Writer. It seems to be having trouble with write road. Parentheses.
So I can't stay too much longer here. Let's see. No, that's not what we want. Let me copy that. Wow, it did not copy what I wanted it to. So step one, when you get an error, paste it into Google.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Maybe we will pick back up with this tomorrow. I have to go to work here, so hold tight. But I think we have the framework in place for most of our methods now. Now we need to test them. We need to test them thoroughly, and then we're going to want to test them for customers and for the store owners and for stores and products, you know, everything in our system here. So homework, you can go through and you can go look at all of the functions we've written here. Make sure you understand them. I mean, of course, we want to make sure they work, so we might have to tweak them here and there. But you can also keep going on the main program loop. So now you could set up some of the conditionals to let the user, like change something about themselves or things like that. You could set up a conditional for if they're a customer, what things can they do versus if they're a store owner. So you remember when we went through and we wrote up, I think it was all down here, right? These are the sorts of things that store owners and customers are going to want to do. Both kinds of users should be able to do this. They should be able to see and update their information, change their password and so on, be able to delete their account, be able to delete their store, right? The next thing that we're going to be doing is verifying all of the functionality that we've written here. So looks like we'll have to look into this a little bit. I think based on what this error is saying is that this right here, we aren't giving it a specific type. So, you know what, out of curiosity, let me try making it a string, just like that. Not fix it? Nope. I really do need to go to work, but I'm just curious what it thinks.
Maybe I can work on this a bit and see if I can figure it out.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you can use the debugger too. We want to see what it thinks fields is here, because it doesn't think when we get down here that data is iterable, which is interesting because it should be a list, right? All right, well, anyway, we have some debugging to do, and we have to make sure that all of our other functions work as well. This was just the first one, right? But before you just assume that you're fine, even though everything we have, you know, we don't get syntax error, it looks like everything should work, right? We need to go through and we need to test it thoroughly before we use any of this in our application. So that's what we'll be doing tomorrow and as many days as necessary, actually, until we get everything working completely properly.
Okay.
All right, well, we will pick back up there tomorrow then.